The emergency alarm screamed across the Zephyrian Military Academy, its piercing wail echoing through the crystalline corridors that housed the galaxy's most promising young warriors. Cadet Vextar pressed his scaled palms against his auditory receptors, wincing as the sound reverberated through his reptilian skull. Around him, his fellow cadets scrambled in organized chaos, their various alien forms moving with practiced precision despite the obvious tension crackling through the air. "All combat training squads report to Emergency Bay 7 immediately," announced Commander Creeth's voice through the Academy's neural broadcast system. The Mantoid officer's words carried an edge that made even the bravest cadets' exoskeletons shiver. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Vextar's throat sac pulsed nervously as he joined the stream of cadets rushing through the Academy's main thoroughfare. His clawed feet clicked against the polished metal floor, matching the rhythm of dozens of other species all heading toward the same destination. Beside him, Cadet Zurani's forearms worked frantically to secure her equipment harness, her purple-tinged skin pale with anxiety. "What do you think it is this time?" she asked, her voice a melodic trill that betrayed her nervousness. Her species, the harmonics, were known for their ability to control others through sound, but right now she sounded like any frightened student. "Probably another simulation malfunction," replied Grixacor, the massive crystalline being whose body chimed softly as he moved. His species communicated primarily through harmonic resonance, but he had learned to modulate his natural frequencies to produce recognizable speech. Remember last month when the gravity generators went haywire during the Siege of Nexus Prime scenario? Vextar wasn't so sure. The emergency felt different somehow, more urgent and real than their usual training exercises. As they approached Emergency Bay 7, he could smell the distinct scent of fear pheromones from at least 6 different species, all mixing into an olfactory cocktail that made his predatory instincts twitch uncomfortably. The emergency bay doors hissed open to reveal a scene that confirmed Vextar's worst suspicions. This wasn't a drill or a malfunction. Standing in the center of the bay, surrounded by what appeared to be the Academy's entire senior staff, was a containment unit unlike anything he had ever seen. The device hummed with barely contained energy, its surface covered in warning symbols from dozens of different civilizations. Commander Creeth stood at attention, his mantis-like head swiveling to observe the gathering cadets with compound eyes that missed nothing. Behind him, Professor Yilmoth's tentacles writhed with agitation, while Security Chief Brondar's stone-like features remained impassive despite the obvious tension in his massive shoulders. "Cadets," Commander Creeth began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen real combat across a dozen star systems. "What you are about to hear is classified at the highest levels. Your oath to the Galactic Defense Coalition binds you to secrecy regarding today's events." The containment unit pulsed with an ominous red light, and several cadets instinctively stepped backward. Vextar's predatory instincts screamed at him to run, but his training kept him rooted in place. 6 hours ago, the commander continued, a survey team on Kepler 442b made a discovery that has shaken the xenobiology department to its core. They found a creature that should not exist according to everything we know about evolutionary biology and energy manipulation. Professor Yilmoth's tentacles coiled tighter around his translation device as he stepped forward. "The creature you see contained here," he said, gesturing toward the humming unit, "represents a complete anomaly in our understanding of predatory species. It appears to be from Earth's distant past, somehow preserved in stasis for millions of years." A ripple of excitement and fear passed through the assembled cadets. Earth creatures were legendary throughout the galaxy for their unpredictable nature and seemingly impossible adaptability. Most civilized species had learned to give human worlds a wide berth after the incidents during the Proxima Centauri expansion. The creature has been designated as a Class X apex predator, Security Chief Brondar rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. In the 6 hours since its discovery, it has killed 14 researchers, escaped containment 3 times, and demonstrated abilities that defy our current understanding of physics. Cadet Yixine raised one of her 6 arms tentatively. The insectoid student's antenna twitched nervously as she spoke. "Sir, if it's so dangerous, why bring it to the Academy?" Commander Kreeth's head tilted in what might have been approval. "An excellent question, Cadet. The creature cannot be destroyed by conventional means. Energy weapons seem to make it stronger, and physical barriers merely slow it down temporarily. However, intelligence suggests that it can be contained through specific techniques that we have yet to master." "Your mission," Professor Yilmoth added, his tentacles gesturing toward the containment unit, "is to develop those techniques. You represent the finest military minds in the galaxy, each bringing unique perspectives from your respective species. If anyone can solve this puzzle, it is you." The containment unit suddenly shuddered, and the red light intensified. A sound escaped from within that made every cadet's survival instincts scream in unison. It was a deep, primal roar that spoke to something ancient and terrifying in the genetic memory of every predator and prey species present. "What exactly are we looking at?" asked Cadet Morgeth, his avian features ruffling with barely contained panic. His species had evolved from creatures not unlike Earth's ancient raptors, and something about that roar triggered deep-seated fears in his DNA. Commander Kreeth gestured to the main display screen, which flickered to life, showing grainy footage from the survey mission. The image showed what appeared to be a massive cave system, carved from dark stone and filled with shadows that seemed to move independently. In the center of the frame, barely visible in the dim light, was a creature that defied easy description. It stood roughly 3 meters tall at the shoulder, its body covered in what appeared to be a combination of scales and coarse fur. Its head was reptilian, but with forward-facing eyes that spoke to predatory intelligence. Most disturbing were its limbs, which seemed to shift and change as they watched, adapting to whatever situation the creature found itself in. The survey team designated it as a Terran Apex hybrid, Professor Yilmoth explained, his voice carrying a note of scientific fascination despite the obvious danger. "It appears to combine the most effective hunting adaptations from multiple Earth species, both extinct and extinct." "How is that possible?" Vexatar found himself asking, his scientific curiosity overriding his instinctual fear. "We don't know," the professor admitted. "Earth's evolutionary history is chaotic compared to most worlds. Their species seem to develop in ways that follow no predictable pattern. This creature represents an impossibility that somehow exists." The containment unit shuddered again, and this time they could hear scratching sounds from within. Long, deliberate scrapes that suggested the creature was testing the boundaries of its prison with methodical intelligence. "Your task," Commander Kreeth announced, "is to develop a reliable method of controlling this creature. Not killing it, not simply containing it, but actually controlling it in a way that allows for study and potential utilization in defense scenarios." The implications hung heavy in the air. If the Galactic Defense Coalition could harness such a creature, it would revolutionize their approach to dangerous situations throughout the galaxy. But first, they had to solve the puzzle of how to make it cooperate. "You will work in teams of 6, Security Chief Brondar added. "Each team will be given 1 hour with the creature in a controlled environment. Standard safety protocols are in effect, including emergency teleportation and medical teams standing by." Vextar felt his stomach drop as the reality of the situation hit him. They were going to be locked in a room with that thing, expected to somehow figure out how to control it when trained scientists and security personnel had already failed. "Team assignments are posted on your personal communicators," Commander Kreeth announced. Team Alpha will begin in 30 minutes. Use this time to review the available data and formulate your initial approach. As the assembly dispersed, Vextar checked his communicator and felt a mix of relief and concern. He was assigned to Team Beta, which gave him a brief reprieve, but also meant he would have to watch Team Alpha's inevitable failure before his own attempt. His teammates gathered around him in a small circle near one of the bay's viewing windows. Zorani was there, along with Grixkor and 3 others he recognized from advanced combat theory classes. They were all accomplished students, top of their respective specialties, but looking at their faces, Vextar could see the same doubt he felt reflected in their expressions. "So," Zorani began, her harmonic voice dropping to a whisper, "does anyone actually have any idea how to approach this?" Cadet Next Rule, a quantum species whose form seemed to flicker between dimensions, phased slightly as he considered the question. "My people have experience with creatures that exist partially outside normal space-time," he offered, "but this thing seems to be fully corporeal despite its impossible nature." "The footage suggests it's intelligent?" added Cadet Silvera, her plant-like form rustling with thought. "Look at how it tested the boundaries of each containment system. It's learning, adapting." Grixkor's crystalline body chimed softly as he processed information. "Intelligence makes it more dangerous, but also potentially more predictable. If we can understand its motivations, perhaps we can influence its behavior." Vextar studied the creature's data profile on his communicator, looking for any detail that might provide insight. Its energy signatures were off the charts, its physical capabilities seemed to increase under stress, and its behavior patterns showed a level of cunning that rivaled most sentient species. "Wait," he said, noticing something in the behavioral analysis. "Look at this section about its response to different stimuli." His teammates leaned in as he highlighted a particular data set. The creature showed increased aggression when faced with energy weapons, technological devices, and large groups. But there was an interesting note about its behavior when alone with single individuals who displayed no aggressive intent. "It becomes more docile when not threatened," Zorani observed. "That's not typical for an apex predator." "Unless it's confident in its dominance," Nexrul pointed out. "Many predators conserve energy when they don't perceive an immediate threat." Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of Team Alpha being called to their testing chamber. Through the bay's windows, they could see the 6 cadets being escorted toward a heavily reinforced room adjacent to the main bay. Each wore full combat armor and carried enough firepower to level a small building. The viewing screen activated, showing the interior of the testing chamber as Team Alpha entered. The room was stark and empty except for the creature's containment unit, which had been moved to the center of the space. Safety barriers created a perimeter around the unit, and the cadets took positions behind portable shields. "Beginning release sequence," announced the testing supervisor through the communication system. "All safety protocols are active." The containment unit hissed as its seals disengaged, and the Terran Apex hybrid emerged with fluid grace that belied its massive size. For a moment, it simply stood there, head turning slowly as it surveyed its new environment and the 6 heavily armed cadets arrayed against it. Then it moved. The creature's speed was impossible to track with the naked eye. One moment it was standing calmly in the center of the chamber, the next it was launching itself toward Team Alpha's position with a roar that made the viewing bay's reinforced windows vibrate. The cadets responded with textbook precision, laying down a coordinated barrage of energy fire that would have stopped any normal creature in its tracks. Instead, the beams seemed to be absorbed by the creature's hide, and its movements actually became faster and more aggressive. Within 30 seconds, 3 cadets had been teleported to safety by the emergency systems, their armor breached despite the best defensive technology in the galaxy. The remaining three had taken shelter behind an energy barrier that the creature was methodically dismantling with claws that seemed to cut through anything they touched. "Emergency extraction initiated," the supervisor announced, and the remaining cadets vanished in bursts of light just as the barrier failed completely. The creature stood alone in the chamber, turning slowly to look directly at the viewing window where the remaining teams watched in shocked silence. Its eyes held an intelligence that was distinctly unsettling, as if it understood exactly what was happening and found their efforts amusing. "Team Beta," Commander Kreeth's voice cut through the stunned quiet, "you have 15 minutes to develop an alternative approach. I suggest you use that time wisely." Vexatar looked at his teammates and saw his own thoughts reflected in their expressions. Everything they had been taught about handling dangerous creatures had just been proven utterly useless. If they were going to succeed where Team Alpha had failed so spectacularly, they needed to think completely outside the boundaries of conventional tactics. But what approach could possibly work against something that seemed to grow stronger when challenged and more dangerous when threatened? The answer would have to come from somewhere none of them had thought to look before, because everything they knew about predator management had just been thrown out the nearest airlock. The clock was ticking and the creature was waiting. Team Beta's 15 minutes felt like 15 seconds as they frantically reviewed everything they knew about creature behavior and control techniques. Vextar's scaled fingers drummed nervously against his communicator while his teammates threw out increasingly desperate suggestions. "What if we use sonic frequencies to confuse it?" Zuraani proposed, her harmonic voice strained with tension. "The data shows it adapts to sonic attacks within seconds," Grixkor replied, his crystalline form chiming with frustration. "My people tried that approach on a similar creature decades ago. It ended badly." Nexrul phased partially out of existence as he considered their options. "Perhaps a multi-dimensional approach? If we can shift part of it into quantum space—" "Too risky," Silvera interrupted, her plant-like form rustling with agitation. "We don't know how it would react to dimensional displacement. It might become more dangerous." Vexatar watched the creature through the viewing window as his teammates debated. It had settled into a crouch in the center of the chamber, but its eyes remained alert and intelligent. There was something about its posture that reminded him of the hunting cats from his homeworld, but also something else he couldn't quite identify. "Time's up, Team Beta," Commander Kreeth announced. "Report to Testing Chamber 2 for your attempt." As they filed toward their designated chamber, Vexatar caught sight of something unusual near the bay's main entrance. A figure in an unfamiliar uniform was speaking quietly with Professor Yilmoth, their conversation too distant to overhear but clearly intense. The figure was shorter than most Academy personnel, with a bipedal form that seemed somehow both familiar and alien. Their skin was a pale, pinkish tone that Vextar had never seen before, and their movements had a fluid quality that spoke to excellent physical conditioning, despite their seemingly delicate build. "Who is that?" he asked Zorani, who had also noticed the newcomer. "No idea," she replied, her harmonic voice carrying a note of curiosity. "But look at how the professors are deferring to them. That uniform doesn't match any coalition species I know." Their speculation was cut short as they entered Testing Chamber 2. Like its neighbor, the room was stark and utilitarian, designed for maximum safety rather than comfort. The creature's containment unit sat in the center, humming with the same ominous energy as before. "Remember," Vextar said to his team as they took their positions, "everything conventional has failed. We need to think differently." "Define differently," Nexrul said, his quantum form flickering with nervous energy. Before Vextar could answer, the release sequence began. The containment unit hissed open, and the Terran Apex hybrid emerged with the same fluid grace they had witnessed before. This time, however, Team Beta had positioned themselves differently. Instead of forming an aggressive perimeter, they had spread out around the chamber's edges, weapons powered down to minimal settings. The creature emerged and immediately began its assessment routine, head turning to catalog each cadet's position. But something was different this time. Without the immediate threat of heavy weapons fire, it didn't launch into an attack. Instead, it began to pace in a slow circle, keeping all 6 cadets in its field of vision. "It's waiting," Silvera whispered through their comm channel. "Waiting to see what we do." Vexitar stepped forward slowly, his hands visible and empty. The creature's massive head swiveled to focus on him, but it didn't attack. Its eyes, he realized, held a depth of intelligence that was almost disturbing in its intensity. "Easy," he said softly, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey non-aggression. "We're not here to hurt you." The creature tilted its head in what might have been curiosity. For a moment, Vexitar thought they might actually be making progress. Then the creature took a step forward, and several of his teammates raised their weapons reflexively. The change was instantaneous. The creature's posture shifted from curious to aggressive, its hide beginning to ripple with absorbed energy. It lowered its head and prepared to charge. "Weapons down!" Vexitar shouted, but it was too late. The creature launched itself forward with that impossible speed, heading directly for the cadets who had shown aggression. The emergency extraction kicked in, and within moments the chamber was empty except for the creature, which stood in the center looking distinctly unsatisfied with the brief encounter. Team Beta found themselves in the medical bay, their armor intact, but their confidence shattered. They had lasted longer than Team Alpha, but the result had been essentially the same. "At least we confirmed the aggression trigger," Nexrule said, trying to sound positive despite their obvious failure. "Much good that does us," Grixacor chimed mournfully. "If showing any sign of defense provokes it to attack, how are we supposed to protect ourselves while attempting control?" Vexitar was about to respond when the bay's doors opened to admit the mysterious figure he had seen earlier. Up close, the being was even more unusual. Their features were symmetrical in a way that suggested an evolutionary path focused on tool use rather than specialized environmental adaptation. Their eyes were small by galactic standards but seemed to take in every detail of their surroundings with remarkable focus. "Excuse me," the figure said, their voice carrying an accent that Vexitar couldn't place. "I'm looking for the cadets who just attempted the creature interaction. Would that be you?" Zorani's harmonic abilities allowed her to detect emotional undertones in speech, and her posture shifted to one of increased attention. "Yes, that's us. And you are?" "Dr. Sarah Chen, xenobiological consultant," the figure replied with what appeared to be a facial expression indicating friendliness. "I specialize in Earth-based life forms. I understand you've been having some difficulty with our friend in there." Vexitar's throat sac pulsed with surprise. "You're from Earth?" "Born and raised in Neo Francisco," Dr. Chen confirmed. "I was brought in when the creature was first discovered. I've been studying the data from all the interaction attempts." Grixacor's crystalline form chimed with curiosity. "Do you have insights that might help us? Our conventional approaches have proven completely ineffective." Dr. Chen's expression shifted to what Vexitar was beginning to recognize as amusement. "Conventional approaches are exactly the problem. This creature isn't responding to military tactics because it doesn't recognize them as relevant to its current situation." "I don't understand," Silvera said, her plant-like form rustling with confusion. "How can it not recognize a threat response?" "Because to this creature, you're not a threat," Dr. Chen explained patiently. "You're prey, and prey doesn't threaten predators. Prey either runs away or gets eaten. When you show aggression, you're violating the creature's understanding of how prey should behave, which confuses and angers it." Nexrule phased slightly as he processed this information. "So our defensive postures are actually making the situation worse?" "Exactly." Dr. Chen moved to one of the bay's display screens and called up the creature's behavioral data. This creature evolved in an environment where it was the absolute apex predator. Nothing in its evolutionary history has taught it to expect meaningful resistance from potential prey species. Vextar studied the data with new eyes, seeing patterns he had missed before. So how do we interact with it without triggering its predatory instincts? Dr. Chen's facial expression shifted again, this time to something that might have been confidence. We don't try to fight it or control it through force. We establish a different kind of relationship entirely. What kind of relationship? Zorani asked, her harmonic voice carrying skeptical notes. The same kind my ancestors established with other apex predators on Earth thousands of years ago, Dr. Chen replied. We make it understand that we're not prey, but we're also not a threat. We're something else entirely. The concept was so alien to everything they had been taught about creature management that Vextar felt his predatory instincts rebel against it. That's impossible. You can't simply decide not to be prey to a predator. Actually, Dr. Chen said with that same confident expression, you can. But it requires abandoning everything you think you know about predator-prey relationships. Before any of them could respond, Commander Kreeth's voice echoed through the medical bay. Dr. Chen, report to Testing Chamber 1 immediately. We're ready for your demonstration. Dr. Chen stood and moved toward the door, then paused to look back at Team Beta. Would you like to observe? I think you might find it educational. The cadets exchanged glances and quickly followed Dr. Chen to the observation deck overlooking Testing Chamber 1. Word had spread quickly through the academy, and the deck was packed with cadets, instructors, and senior staff all eager to see what the human consultant would do differently. Professor Yilmoth's tentacles writhed with nervous energy as Dr. Chen entered the chamber. Are you certain about this approach, Doctor? The creature has proven extremely dangerous. I'm certain, Dr. Chen replied through the comm system. But I'll need everyone to trust me and not interfere, no matter what you see. Commander Kreeth activated the release sequence, and once again the containment unit hissed open. The Terran Apex hybrid emerged with the same fluid grace, immediately beginning its assessment of this new environment. What happened next defied everything Vextar thought he knew about predator behavior. Dr. Chen didn't take a defensive position. She didn't raise weapons or create barriers. Instead, she simply sat down in the center of the chamber, cross-legged on the floor, and waited. The creature approached slowly, its massive head lowered as it investigated this new type of prey behavior. Dr. Chen remained perfectly still, showing no signs of aggression, fear, or submission. She simply sat there, breathing calmly, meeting the creature's intelligent eyes with her own. The creature circled her once, then twice. Its nostrils flared as it took in her scent, and its head tilted as if puzzled by what it was encountering. This wasn't prey behavior as it understood it, but it also wasn't a threat display. Then Dr. Chen did something that made every observer in the viewing deck gasp in shocked disbelief. She held out one hand, palm up, in what appeared to be an offering gesture. The creature stopped its circling and stared at the extended hand. For long moments, nothing happened. Then, with surprising gentleness for such a massive predator, it extended its own clawed appendage and briefly touched Dr. Chen's palm. Impossible, Professor Yilmoth whispered, his tentacles frozen in shock. But Dr. Chen wasn't finished. She slowly reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew something that looked like a compressed food bar. She broke off a piece and held it out to the creature. The creature sniffed the offering, then delicately took it with the tips of its claws. It examined the food for a moment before consuming it with obvious appreciation. She's feeding it, Zorani breathed, her harmonic voice barely audible with amazement. Dr. Chen continued this process for several minutes, offering small pieces of food while maintaining eye contact with the creature. Gradually, the massive predator's posture began to change. its aggressive stance relaxed, and it settled into a sitting position that mirrored Dr. Chen's own. Then the human did something that made every predator species in the observation deck's survival instincts scream in terror. She reached out and gently touched the creature's massive head. Instead of attacking, the creature leaned into the touch, making a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a rumble of contentment. "How is this possible?" Security Chief Brondar's stone-like features showed cracks of amazement. Dr. Chen stood slowly, and the creature stood with her. She took a few steps toward the chamber's exit, and the creature followed at her side like a well-trained companion. When she stopped, it stopped. When she sat again, it settled beside her. "Emergency extraction standing by," announced the safety supervisor, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Not necessary," Dr. Chen replied calmly. "We're doing just fine in here." She spent another 20 minutes in the chamber, gradually introducing various commands and gestures. The creature responded to each one with intelligent cooperation, its behavior becoming increasingly dog-like despite its massive size and predatory nature. Finally, Dr. Chen guided the creature back to its containment unit. It entered willingly, settling into the space like a pet returning to its favorite sleeping spot. The chamber fell silent as the containment seals engaged. In the observation deck, every being present stared in stunned disbelief at what they had just witnessed. "How?" Commander Kreeth finally asked, his compound eyes fixed on Dr. Chen as she exited the chamber. Dr. Chen's expression showed that confidence again, along with something that might have been satisfaction. "Simple," she said. "I treated it like what it actually is instead of what I expected it to be." "And what is it actually?" Professor Yilmoth asked, his tentacles quivering with scientific curiosity. "A very large, very intelligent dog that's been locked in a box and frightened by everything it's encountered since waking up," Dr. Chen replied. "Once I established that I wasn't a threat, wasn't prey, and was willing to provide what it needed, it was happy to cooperate." Vextar felt his worldview shifting as he processed what he had just seen. Everything they had been taught about apex predators, about creature control, about the fundamental nature of predator-prey relationships, had just been demonstrated to be incomplete at best. "But the aggression, the attacks," Nexrel protested, his quantum form flickering with confusion. "It was genuinely trying to kill us. Because you were threatening it," Dr. Chen explained patiently. "From its perspective, you were strange creatures invading its territory with weapons and hostile intent. Any Earth predator would react the same way under those circumstances." "So the solution was simply to not threaten it?" Grixkor chimed in disbelief. "The solution," Dr. Chen corrected, "was to establish a relationship based on mutual respect and benefit rather than dominance and control. This creature is intelligent enough to understand cooperation when it's offered genuinely." The implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in. If a human could establish this kind of relationship with what was supposedly an uncontrollable apex predator, what did that say about human approaches to dangerous situations in general? More importantly, what did it say about the fundamental assumptions that guided galactic civilization's approach to threat management and species interaction? As the crowd began to disperse, each being lost in their own thoughts about what they had seen, Vextar realized that this demonstration had changed more than just their understanding of one creature. It had opened a door to an entirely different way of thinking about conflict, cooperation, and the relationships between different forms of intelligent life. And that, he suspected, was going to have implications far beyond anything they could currently imagine. The emergency debriefing session convened in the Academy's largest conference chamber, but the atmosphere was unlike any military briefing Vexitar had ever attended. Instead of the usual crisp efficiency, there was an undercurrent of confusion and wonder that made even the senior officers seem uncertain. Dr. Chen sat at the head of the briefing table, still wearing her simple expedition uniform, rather than the formal attire everyone else had hastily donned. Her relaxed posture contrasted sharply with the rigid military bearing of the assembled officers and instructors, yet somehow she commanded the room's attention effortlessly. "Before we begin," Commander Kreith announced, his compound eyes sweeping across the gathered personnel, "I want to emphasize that everything discussed in this session remains classified at the highest levels. The implications of today's demonstration extend far beyond simple creature management." Professor Yilmoth's tentacles writhed with barely contained excitement as he activated the chamber's holographic display system. "Dr. Chen, would you please explain your methodology for the record? Our xenobiology department needs to understand exactly how you achieved what our best military minds considered impossible." Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, displaying that peculiar human expression that Vextar was learning to recognize as thoughtful consideration. "The methodology itself is quite simple," she began. "The complexity lies in abandoning preconceived notions about predator behavior and threat response." Security Chief Brondar's stone-like features shifted into what might have been skepticism. "You're suggesting that our entire understanding of apex predator management is fundamentally flawed?" "Not flawed," Dr. Chen corrected gently. "Incomplete. Your approaches work perfectly well for most situations you encounter, but they're based on assumptions that don't apply to Earth-evolved species, particularly highly intelligent ones." She gestured to the holographic display, which showed behavioral analysis data from the day's interactions. Every attempt to control the creature began with the assumption that it needed to be contained, dominated, or subdued. These approaches triggered defensive responses because the creature perceived them as challenges to its dominance. Cadet Morgeth, the avian student whose species had evolved from natural predators, raised a wing tentatively. "But surely any predator would respond to a show of strength. That's fundamental survival behavior." Dr. Chen's expression shifted to what Vexatar was learning, indicated patience mixed with teaching intent. "On most worlds, yes. But Earth's evolutionary history is unique in ways that most galactic species don't fully appreciate." She touched the display controls, and the hologram shifted to show Earth's planetary data. Earth has experienced multiple mass extinction events, dramatic climate shifts, and resource scarcities that forced species into cooperative survival strategies. The most successful Earth predators learned to form social bonds, not just with their own species, but with others that could provide mutual benefit. "You're talking about domestication," Professor Yilmoth observed, his tentacles curling with understanding. "Domestication is part of it," Dr. Chen agreed. "But the concept goes deeper than that. Humans didn't domesticate wolves by dominating them. We formed partnerships based on mutual advantage. The wolves got reliable food and protection, we got hunting assistance and early warning systems." Vextar found himself leaning forward, fascinated despite his predatory instincts' discomfort with the concept. "But how does that apply to a creature that could easily overpower any human?" Dr. Chen smiled, and for the first time Vexatar understood that the expression indicated genuine pleasure rather than aggression. "Physical power isn't the only form of strength that matters. Intelligence, resources, and the ability to provide benefits can be just as valuable to a predator as raw dominance." She manipulated the display to show footage from her interaction with the creature. "When I entered that chamber, I wasn't presenting myself as either a threat to be eliminated or prey to be consumed. I was offering a third option: partnership." "The food," Zorani said suddenly, her harmonic voice carrying notes of realization. "You brought it food." "Exactly. I demonstrated that I had access to resources it wanted and was willing to share them without demanding submission in return. That's the foundation of any partnership." Commander Kreith's head tilted in the mantis equivalent of deep thought. But surely such an approach requires extensive knowledge of the specific creature's needs and behaviors. How could you know what would appeal to something from Earth's distant past? Dr. Chen's expression became more serious. Because despite its unique evolutionary path, it still follows certain universal principles of intelligence and social behavior. All intelligent predators respond to consistent, non-threatening behavior from other intelligent beings. The key is recognizing what constitutes non-threatening behavior from their perspective. She touched the controls again, and the display showed comparative behavioral data from various Earth species. Humans have been forming these kinds of partnerships for thousands of years, not just with wolves, but with horses, birds of prey, dolphins, and dozens of other predatory species. We've learned to read their signals, understand their needs, and communicate our intentions in ways they can interpret correctly. This is all fascinating, Security Chief Brondar rumbled. But how does it translate to practical applications? We can't simply send humans to handle every dangerous creature the Coalition encounters. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. You're thinking too narrowly. The principles I use today don't require being human. They require understanding that intelligent beings, regardless of species, generally prefer cooperation to conflict when their basic needs are met. The room fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. Vextar felt his worldview shifting as he considered what Dr. Chen was suggesting. You're talking about changing our entire approach to first contact protocols, Professor Yilmoth said slowly, his tentacles moving in patterns that indicated deep thought. I'm suggesting that the Coalition's default assumption of threat assessment and defensive positioning might be counterproductive when dealing with intelligent species, Dr. Chen replied. Consider how many first contact situations have devolved into conflicts that might have been avoided with different approaches. Cadet Yixin raised one of her 6 arms. But what about genuinely hostile species? Surely some beings simply cannot be reasoned with? Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Absolutely. There are species that are fundamentally incompatible with peaceful coexistence. But current protocols don't effectively distinguish between genuine hostility and defensive responses to perceived threats. By defaulting to defensive postures, we may be creating conflicts where none needed to exist. Commander Kreeth activated his personal recording device. Dr. Chen, are you willing to work with our training departments to develop new protocols based on these principles? Of course, Dr. Chen replied. But I should warn you that implementing these approaches will require fundamental changes in how Coalition personnel are trained to think about threat assessment and conflict resolution. Vextar found himself speaking before he fully realized he intended to. What specific changes? Dr. Chen turned to look at him directly. Her small eyes, somehow seeming to see more than their size, suggested possible. The biggest change is abandoning the assumption that showing strength is always the best response to potential threats. Sometimes, showing vulnerability or offering assistance is more effective at preventing violence. The concept was so alien to everything Vextar had been taught that his predatory instincts actively rebelled against it. Showing vulnerability to a predator is suicide. Showing vulnerability to a frightened or defensive being can be the key to establishing trust, Dr. Chen countered. The creature in that chamber wasn't attacking because it was hungry or territorial. It was attacking because it was scared and confused. When I sat down, I was showing it that I wasn't afraid, which helped it understand that I wasn't a threat. Nexrul phased slightly as he processed this information. So the key was demonstrating confidence without aggression? Confidence, resources, and most importantly, the willingness to invest time in understanding the creature's actual needs rather than assuming what those needs might be, Dr. Chen explained. Grixcor's crystalline form chimed with curiosity. How do you learn to read the signals of a species you've never encountered before? Dr. Chen's expression shifted to what Vextar was learning indicated both amusement and pride. Practice, observation, and a willingness to be wrong multiple times while you figure it out. Humans have been doing this for millennia out of necessity. Our planet forced us to learn how to coexist with hundreds of different predator species, or we wouldn't have survived. Earth shaped humans into specialists in interspecies communication, Professor Yilmoth observed, his tentacles moving in patterns of scientific excitement. Not just communication, Dr. Chen corrected. Cooperation. Humans learned early that we couldn't dominate our environment through strength alone. We had to become partners with other species, understanding their needs and finding ways to meet them, while getting our own needs met in return. Commander Kreeth leaned back in his chair, his compound eyes reflecting deep consideration. These principles could revolutionize our approach to dozens of ongoing conflict situations throughout Coalition space. They could, Dr. Chen agreed, but only if the Coalition is willing to invest in training personnel to think differently about what constitutes strength and success in dangerous situations. Vextar felt compelled to ask the question that had been growing in his mind throughout the discussion. Why haven't humans shared these approaches before? If they're so effective, why keep them to yourselves? Dr. Chen's expression became somewhat rueful. Humans haven't been keeping them secret. We've been trying to demonstrate them for decades. But most Coalition species interpret our approaches as signs of weakness or naivety rather than sophisticated strategy. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Vextar realized that he had indeed witnessed human negotiators and diplomats using similar approaches in various situations, but like most Coalition citizens, he had dismissed their methods as ineffective softness rather than recognizing them as deliberate techniques. The creature management demonstration was just a small example, Dr. Chen continued. These same principles apply to trade negotiations, territorial disputes, resource conflicts, and most other forms of interspecies tension. The challenge is convincing people to try approaches that seem counterintuitive to their survival instincts. Security Chief Brondar's massive form shifted as he considered the implications. You're suggesting that human diplomatic successes aren't due to weakness or luck, but to genuine strategic advantages in understanding how to de-escalate conflicts? I'm suggesting that humans have had to become very good at finding non-violent solutions to dangerous situations because our planet gave us no choice, Dr. Chen replied. When you're sharing territory with creatures that can easily kill you, learning to communicate and cooperate becomes a survival skill. Professor Yilmoth activated the holographic display again, showing statistical data on human involvement in Coalition conflicts. The numbers support your assertion, Dr. Chen. Human mediation has resolved conflicts that stymied our best military strategists for decades. Commander Kreeth stood abruptly, his posture shifting to one of decision. I'm recommending to Coalition Command that Dr. Chen be appointed as head of a new interspecies relations training program. If these approaches can prevent even a fraction of the conflicts we currently face through military intervention, the resource savings alone would justify the investment. Dr. Chen nodded, but her expression carried notes of caution. I accept, but with one condition. Any training program must emphasize that these approaches require genuine respect for other species' intelligence and needs. They can't be used manipulatively or as more subtle forms of domination. The moment you start trying to trick other beings instead of genuinely cooperating with them, the whole system breaks down. Vextar understood immediately why this condition was necessary. The temptation to use these techniques as more sophisticated tools of control rather than genuine partnership would be enormous for many Coalition species. The creature trusted you, he said suddenly, the realization hitting him with unexpected force. It wasn't just responding to your techniques. It genuinely trusted that you meant it no harm. Dr. Chen's expression brightened with what Vextar now recognized as approval. Exactly. Trust can't be faked, only earned. And earning it requires actually being trustworthy, not just appearing to be. As the briefing session concluded and personnel began filing out to begin implementing the new protocols, Vexitar found himself profoundly changed by what he had witnessed. The galaxy suddenly seemed like a much more complex and potentially cooperative place than he had ever imagined. The massive creature that had terrified the Academy's best students was now resting peacefully in its containment unit, no longer a prisoner, but a willing guest waiting for its next interaction with the human who had bothered to understand what it actually needed. And perhaps, Vextar thought as he made his way back to his quarters, that simple shift in perspective might change everything about how the galaxy's countless species learned to live with one another. The human approach wasn't about being stronger or smarter than other species. It was about recognizing that in a universe full of intelligent beings, the greatest strength lay not in the ability to dominate, but in the wisdom to cooperate. And that was a lesson that could reshape the entire galaxy's understanding of what it truly meant to be civilized. In the end, the most powerful predator in the known universe had been tamed not through force, but through something far more revolutionary. The simple recognition that every intelligent being, no matter how dangerous, ultimately wanted the same basic things: safety, sustenance, and understanding. It was, Vextar realized, a very human insight, and it was going to change everything.